Welcome to the Reliquary, the show that takes a deep dive into the greatest myths, monsters, and mysteries of the world. In this episode, we set sail into the great unknown. And it turns out, when you're heading out onto the high seas, you kind of want an accurate map. But what if I told you, historically speaking, those were a little hard to come by? All right, so we all know the story, right? In 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue and discovers America. There's a couple of problems with that story, though, because first of all, when Columbus bumbled his way into the Bahamas, there were already people living there. So, discovered? I suppose it'd be more accurate to say that Columbus discovered the New World for Europe. Although that's really not true either. You see, almost half a millennium before Columbus made his fateful journey, another intrepid explorer by the name of Leif Erikson discovered a place he calls Vinland, which may or may not be North America. So we're going to separate the facts from the myths, and we're going to look at three things today. One, who is Leif Erikson? Two, did he discover America? I mean, really? And three, well, actually, I'm going to keep that one secret, and it may or may not come up later in the episode. We'll see. It does. All right, let's dive in. First up, Leif Erikson was by all measures a badass Viking. He was the second of three sons born to Eric the Red, who, by the way, was the founder of the first Norse settlement in Greenland. How they got there is a bit, murdery. Leif's entire family had a history of being exiled. His grandfather, Thorvald Asvoldsson, which I'm sure I pronounced perfectly. Look, it's not my fault. You put J's in all the wrong places, and they make the wrong sounds. So we get fjord and fjell and bjork, which I had always previously thought was just the sound that a Norwegian dog made, and was actually surprised to find out that it's a famous Icelandic singer. So I guess I'm offensive in two languages. Bjork, bjork. Anyway, the reason Icelandic and Norwegian both have the same J problem isn't a coincidence. Leif's grandfather, Thorvald, was banished from Norway to Iceland for murder, and just one generation later, Leif's father, Eric the Red, is going to be banished from Iceland to Greenland for, you guessed it, murder. So much banishing. I like how the Norse dealt with their problems. You know what? Get out. Get. Go do your fancy murdering somewhere else. While this show isn't about Eric the Red, the two things I absolutely know about him is that he was banished from Iceland for murder, directly leading him to setting up the first Norse colony on Greenland, and he chose the name Greenland specifically to entice other colonists to join him, knowing full well that there is nothing green there. But come on, it was the 900s. Murdering and misleading people was all the rage. You had to be there. Actually, probably not the best time period to visit. Back to Leif. Or is it Leif? Maybe Joaquin. Whatever. He grows up in Greenland and begins the life of an explorer. And not because he's banished, though. I want to be clear here. It seems like this one is just curious. Now, if you are bad at maps or geography, you might think the distance from Greenland to North America is a really long trip. But it's not as long as you might think. Just about 1,000 nautical miles separate Greenland from Canada. Okay, that actually might seem like a really long way, but just to put things into perspective, Columbus had to travel nearly 4 times that distance. But just because it was a relatively short distance, that doesn't make it an easy trip. Leif was working on a Viking longship, and those things were not built for long-distance open sea travel, and those ships didn't come with all the fancy amenities found on the ships during Columbus's voyage, like triangular sails and maggot-filled bread. Google it, it's gross. While the Vikings did have square sails, a lot of the work was done by good old-fashioned rowing. In fact, the journey was characterized by extreme physical hardships, dangerous weather, and navigational uncertainty. I mean, let's be honest, it's not like he knew exactly where he was going. I'm not even entirely sure he knew anything about where he was going. Depending on which historical account is followed, Leif's journey was either a desperate struggle against a storm or a grueling intentional expedition. Neither of those would be classified as easy, which might explain why he only made the trip one time. Which leads me to number 2. Did Leif Erikson really land in North America? What if I told you there is compelling evidence, both archaeological and literary, that Leif Erikson was the first European to discover and establish a settlement in North America nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus? You'd probably want proof. Fine. Let's start with written accounts. Much of what is known about Leif Erikson's life comes from the Vinland sagas, and in those sagas, there are descriptions of 3 distinct regions Leif explored, including a place called Vinland, whose descriptions place it right here. Oh, I know what you're going to say, but those were written 200 years later, to which I say, I don't like your tone or the way you say that at all, and independent historical mentions of Vinland appear in earlier works, such as Adam of Bremen's historical treatise from around 1075 and the Book of Icelanders from 1122. So take that. But Manville wrote about travels too, and those turn out to be the ravings of a madman. So how can we be sure? That leads us to the archaeological evidence, and this is the clincher. The most significant proof is the discovery of a Norse settlement in Canada. In 1963, 2 archaeologists uncovered ruins of 8 turf wall dwellings, workshops, and a smithy. And carbon dating originally estimated that the site was occupied between 990 and 1050. And artifact findings included a ringed pin of the Dublin Viking type, which connects the settlement to known Norse cultures and supports the descriptions in the saga, bringing us full circle, corroborating the written accounts with the physical evidence. Boom! Do you want to know what Leif Erikson called his Newfoundland? Newfoundland, which it is still called today. So why does Columbus get all of the love and Leif Erikson seems to be relegated to a footnote? Well, that's history. Partially, it is because the Vikings didn't really share that information widely at the time, and not many people could read Icelandic, too many misplaced J's. Even if they did read it, they probably treated it like Manville's Travels, and it wouldn't be the first time a place is put on a map that doesn't actually exist. But in reality, when it comes down to it, it's timing. You see, when Leif found Vinland in 1000 AD, the Silk Road was still the easiest route to Asia for Europeans, and it was not until the Ottomans shut down the land trade after taking Constantinople 400 years later that Europe was forced to the high seas for another way around. So in the end, Leif Erikson was really ahead of his time, and kind of a victim of circumstance. But let me be absolutely clear. He was first. So what about that mysterious third thing I had brought up earlier? Okay, here it is. Before Google Earth or aerial photography, if you wanted to know where you were going, you had to have a really accurate map. And some of the best maps for a long time included islands that simply don't exist. These phantom islands were so well known that they were documented on official maps by cartographers. And one of these islands in particular, the island of Antillia, also known as the Isle of Seven Cities, appears intermittently on maps from 1424 all the way until 1508, which raises some serious questions. Like, why is it sometimes on maps and sometimes not? Can islands be mistaken or perhaps appear under certain conditions? Why is Antillia also known as the Isle of Seven Cities? And why does the legend of that island come with the map itself, like a prize in a cereal box? Well, in order to answer those questions, I guess you have to stay tuned to the next episode to find out.